live just yet. What about step to step media?
I've gone live, I think. Can you see it on YouTube? All good. Okay, so you're very welcome along to the Around Finance monthly webinar. So the intention behind today's webinar is we recently drafted an ebook for small business owners working in the e-commerce space. And the intention today really is just to pick out bits of that and present them so that people who are trying to figure out, some of the fundamentals around e-commerce and how to look at numbers and what are the key numbers to be looking at. And this is from a financial perspective. So from an accountant's perspective, in terms of the things I look at, it's a pretty high level view. We're going to look at just things like profit and P&L forecasting and some fundamental things that I think most entrepreneurs should know who operate in the e-commerce space. We're not really going to go too far down the rabbit hole of a lot of TLA, three-letter anagrams, which e-commerce is famous for. If we were to do a webinar on marketing TLAs and anagrams for the e-commerce space, we could be here for a lot longer than the half hour that I think this is going to run for. So for those of you who have not watched any of these webinars before, my name is Richie Lennon. I'm an accountant. I'm the owner of Around Finance. The practice has been in existence for about 10 years, but it's probably in the last 4 or 5 years that things have started to ramp up quickly. So we are now growing steadily month on month. We have a wide team of accountants and bookkeepers who are trained across a lot of different areas. In particular, we work with a lot of marketing agencies, technology startups, e-commerce business owners. In my own background, I've spent a lot of time, much of the last 10 years, working, teaching finance to startups and mentoring, working with the local enterprise offices, sitting in CFO seats in a number of different SMEs and fast-growing businesses. And it's from that experience that I would bring to the table when we start to look at what I think small business owners should be looking at and what their accountant should be helping small business owners look at and understand. So we'll kick off. As said, we'll run for about half an hour, and I'll run through a few what I would describe as fundamentals. So I think just in terms of what I'm planning on talking about, the first bit's going to be price positioning. I think instead of just jumping into margining, let's stop and pause and ask ourselves the question, what's pricing all about? I'm going to talk about today's session has got an e-commerce focus. I know that some people listening to this, and especially some of our clients, won't just sell online these days. They'll have a bricks and mortar sales channel. I'm going to touch on that just lightly and what that might mean. I'm going to dig in terms of, well, what is it to look at profitability in an e-commerce channel, and what are the key components of figuring out how you make money. I'm going to take that kind of breakdown in terms of margin and look at what it looks like to forecast the P&L so that you can manage your business if you are operating a business with just an e-commerce channel. I'm going to talk a little about inventory forecasting. It's the biggest thing you got to get right when it comes to forecasting in e-commerce, especially has the biggest impact on your cash flow. So stock is lumpy if you're buying it by the container load, and you got to make sure that you're forecasting it correctly so you don't have stock outages. I just want to touch on VAT. It can be a little bit complicated for the e-commerce business owner, especially if you're an early stage entrepreneur, to understand what the implications are of VAT in terms of when you trade and sell online. I'll touch on technology stacks, a tech stack that I see working for a lot of people operating in the e-commerce space, and then just I'll summarize, and that should close out the session. So without further ado, we'll kick off. So before we jump into margin and landed cost and a bunch of different things like that, I would suggest that one of the things that if you are an existing business and you're thinking of launching a new product, or if you're a startup business and you're thinking of creating a product that you're going to sell online, one of the things that you should ask yourself is, well, what is the impact of pricing on the future of my business across the next 2-3 years? And back in the BCom days, it was always that there was 4 Ps in marketing, and then it grew to be 6 Ps in marketing, and product, place, promotion, people, packaging, and there's another one. And of all those, I think pricing is the most important P in the marketing mix. And the reason why is that pricing is linked to everything else. And one things I would suggest is that you have to ask yourself, is there alignment between where I'm positioning my product or where I'm positioning my brand and the prices that I'm charging? And usually you're going to fall on a scale. If you were to consider, look at your product and then rank it against your competition, and ask yourself the question, where do you rank in terms of price and where do you rank in terms of quality? And what you actually do is you break out a graph, this price quality graph, which allows you to kind of figure out your positioning in the market from a pricing perspective. And that's an exercise in brand positioning or product positioning. The other thing you can ask is, where is the price of the new product I'm going to launch? Where does it sit within my product mix? So we might have a product which is priced at the lower end of the market. We have a product that's priced at the premium end of the market. And what's that doing to split the brand or impact our customers' decision when they want to buy from us? So there's a few considerations there. So before you jump in on just pure economics and pure financials in terms of what are you going to make if you sell it for X and Y, step back, ask yourself the question, well, where are we positioning? Are we positioning the business as a premium product? Or are we positioning it on the economy sale whereby? And when you start to think about product positioning from that perspective, there's always a volume consideration. Okay, we're going to price it on the economy sale side of the business and we're going to sell loads. Well, then there's what's the logistics and operations look like? Or we're going to position it on the premium end of the business. We might not sell as much. There might not be as much demand on the operation side in terms of maybe we can pick, pack, and ship in-house versus having to outsource with 3PL. So the first thing to do is to sit back, look at your product, do a good competitor analysis, and ask yourself, where are you positioning that product in the market from the perspective of looking at your competition and from the consumer's perspective? When they engage with your product or in the marketplace, what is the impression that they get in terms of who you are as a business? I think if you're a first-time business or an early-stage entrepreneur, one of the pitfalls I see people make at an early stage is that there's a lack of congruence, or there's a kind of you'll have the early stage entrepreneur who'll put an awful lot of work into their website and their packaging, and everything will look amazing and the branding will be on point, and they'll invest in the product and the quality, and they'll obsess over how amazing this product they're going to release into the market is going to be, and then they'll come along and they'll underprice it. And what I would say to people is that when somebody picks up your product on the shelf, if the perception they have from looking at that product is, oh, this is a really good price, or if it's underpriced, there's a link between pricing and brand positioning, and there's nothing you can do in terms of your website, your logo, to convince a customer that this is of a premium or high quality if it's underpriced. And I think sometimes people get that wrong. So before jumping in on margins and kind of breaking down things like that, it's good to step back in your mind's eye and ask yourself the question, where are you positioning the brand? Where are you positioning the product? And does your pricing make sense in terms of what you're trying to do from a positioning perspective? Okay, with that said, what you get then is really you get this price quality matrix, which sits at the heart of every business plan that you've ever picked up in your life. And it's I think I just broke one out here, which is just take your chocolate bars and you've got your economy kind of cheap end of the scale, and then you've got your premium end of the scale. And the question is, as you start to move towards launching a new product, is there an alignment between what you're trying to do as a brand and the pricing that you set for your product? Okay, so with that said, that first bit is get your pricing positioning correct. Now look at, okay, well, what is the economics, or do the financials make sense for this product that we're going to release into the market, or you're already selling? Okay, so what I would suggest is your next step on that journey then is to look at the financials. And what you got to do is you got to break down the financials in detail. And what I've done here is, so back in the days, I'm still doing a little bit of work for Enterprise Ireland, but typically in this startup environment, you'd have two types of business that would be in the room. So 50% of the businesses will be a product business, 50% of the businesses will be a services business, and usually a software business, a SaaS business of some sort. So I invented two fake company financials. And the product fake company financials was a company called Chewy Bits. And And I built these, I think, in 2019 or something like that. And I use these for teaching classes. So if you're a product business and you're in startup mode, here's how we'll break down your pricing, and we can have a conversation about financial forecasting and understanding your business and so on. So Chewy Bits is a completely fake company that I invented. I think at the time, and this has changed from memory a couple of times, but it was, I think it was, there was like a growth in natural food products, I think, at that point. And there was these packets of protein balls, that were coming on the market. So you could buy a packet of this fake product, which that has never existed, I presume. I've Googled it once or twice, so there's no protein balls product out there called Chewy Bits. But anyway, you could buy a packet of protein balls for 25 quid. And then with that assumption, we'll work from there in terms of figuring out, well, what does pricing look like? So today's session, as mentioned, is not a breakdown in terms of looking at what it looks like to sell products into a multi-channel business. Now, most of our clients, in fact, even the e-commerce clients these days, are not just pure online businesses. They'll have this B2B channel, and there's a whole separate session that might be required in figuring out margins in B2B channels. But as a starting point, let's assume you look at your different sales channels, and there's a B2B channel and there's a B2C channel. What does that look like? So so if you look at it, you take your sales price, you strip out the VAT, and you get back down to your ex-VAT price. And then if you're selling in a distribution channel, obviously the retailer is going to want some margin. So if Chewy Bits is this kind of FMCG, fast moving commercial goods, if you walk into Super Value or Centra or any of the Musgrave outlets, or any of the shops in a petrol station, and you wander around those shops, most of the retail margin in those FMCGs are going to fall in and around 25%. So again, protein balls is in a Super Value. Who knows? It could be in the Food Academy program as a startup or something like that. Assume the Super Value are going to want 25%. It'd be different between Aldi and Tesco's and different things like that. But assume that the retailer gets 25%. And then at some point, you can put the product in the boot of the car and you can drive to a shop and you can sell directly to shops. You can take the stuff out of the boot. You can go in and do tastings and so on. But if you want to go national, you want to go to more shops than you can get to with your own van or car, so you don't drive the wheels off the car, you're going to need a distributor that's going to sell nationally and possibly internationally. Well, what does that look like? Okay, well, the distributor gets another bite out of the cherry. So the retailer gets 25%. Well, what's the distributor going to get? And again, there's a wide variety across a wide range of products, but just throw a number at it and assume that the distributor is going to want 15%. That gets you down to the price that you sell it to the distributor in an offline B2B environment. And then your landed cost is what is the cost that you're either making it for in terms of getting it in a box and getting it in a state that's prepared to sell, or what is this landed cost if you're buying it from China or clothes from Portugal, whatever that might be. The landed cost is what is the cost to get it into warehouse ready in a state that's ready to sell. And what I'm doing here is I'm showing, okay, well, listen, if we were to sell it directly to shops, we make €11.74. The distributor comes into the picture and we make a little bit less margin because the distributor wants their bit. And now we're down to €8.70. But wait a minute, I can sell online and I can cut out the distributor and I can cut out the retailer and I'll make €19.67. There's a slight change here, but I bumped the sale price online to this average order value thing, which leads me into my next slide. So I would say back in 2017, 2018, 2019, almost up to pre-COVID days, this picture would have made a lot of sense, which meant that a lot of products would just launch directly online. They'd ignore B2B and they'd just get straight after online. Well, what I've seen in the last few years, like fundamentally, there's a lot of businesses out there making a lot of money out of e-commerce. E-commerce is growing year on year, but there are headwinds and challenges there in the last couple of years, especially in a post-COVID world. So for example, back in the day, in a pre-COVID world, your return on ad spend might have been, we've seen crazy return on ad spends, which are 7, 8, 9, 10 plus. What that would mean is that you spend €10 on Facebook ads and make €100 in sales, which, was every night was a victory night at the casino. So, and anyone could set up an e-commerce business. All you have to do is pump enough money into Facebook and you'd win all the marbles. That's changed in the last couple of years, big time. And what I think it's done is it's just knocked a bit of sense into what it means to be an entrepreneur and what it means to be a business selling online. I think a lot of the fundamentals around business in terms of having a good product and knowing your audience and communicating to customers and telling a story and understanding your niche or niche and all that becomes more relevant. It's not just about pumping enough money into Facebook, who are at the time probably had more access to, who are using more customer information and so on to kind of get high ROAS, which just meant anybody could just set up an e-commerce store and make money up until the COVID years. And everything's tightened up a little bit in the post-COVID world. So what I'm suggesting is that there was this kind of picture that would have existed up to almost COVID, and then everybody got a massive bump during COVID. Well, a lot of brands online got a massive bump during COVID when everybody was locked in the houses buying online. And from what I'm seeing is there's been this settling down into like a real business environment in a post-COVID world. And what I'm seeing is that the return on ad spends aren't as healthy, and that there's more headwinds there in an e-commerce environment post-COVID. And I just think I think the market's just maturing in lots of ways. I don't think there's as much kind of gold rush type money, but you can still make really good money if you've got a great product and you know your customer and you understand your financials. Okay, with that set up, let's take a deeper dive on the e-commerce channel and see, well, what is it that you need to figure out when it comes to launching this packet of protein balls online that you're going to sell for 25 quid. Okay, so let's do a deep dive. So your perception might be, okay, sell direct to customer online, I'll make €19.67. And next slide is, hold on a minute, let's figure out what the cost might be. So if you do this deep dive on the e-commerce side of it, just as what would it look like to sell online for a Chewy Bits product at 25 quid, at 25 euros? And the assumption is that, because you're selling online, you'll find a way to increase the average order value. So you might throw them in a fruit and nut bar or whatever that might be to sweeten the deal, and you'll drive up the average order value. So they're not just going to buy one unit from you, they might buy 1 unit and a bit from you. So if you look at your data online, you'll see that your average order value, it might be a little bit higher than what you're selling on a per unit basis. But for the purpose of a teaching example, let's assume that Chewy Bits average order value is slightly higher than 1 unit, and they're €28.50 online. Okay, you strip out the VAT, that's 23%, gets you back down to €23.17. And you've got this landed cost, which I've explained already, which is getting the product in a state whereby it's in the warehouse, ready to pick, pack, and ship to your customer. Just as a slight aside, I should explain. When it comes to looking at the e-commerce business, there's 2 types of shipping costs. You'll have your inward shipping costs, which is the cost of getting the product into a box in the warehouse so that somebody can pick, pack, and ship it out to your customer. And then there's this outbound freight and shipping, which is usually referred to as last mile. So the cost in that then it's going to fluctuate. So if Richie Lennon's buying a packet of protein balls in Galway, the cost of shipping to Richie is going to be much less than shipping to Richie's cousin in Timbuktu who's logged online and bought a packet of protein balls. So the landed cost will tend to be quite fixed. It can bounce around for different reasons, but as you start to hit volume and you've got consistency in your logistics, the landed cost should be reasonably fixed. Now, there was some issues in recent years whereby the freight and shipping on the inbound side increased significantly, which obviously squeezed margins, but let's just assume that landed cost is a relatively fixed cost over time, and that this freight and shipping has a lot of flexibility in it, depending on where your customers are living, which markets are operating, and the cost of pick, packing, and shipping. But for the purpose of this teaching example, we've taken an average. So you got your landed cost, you're making €19.67, and then the other cost that you got to consider is outbound, last mile cost, which is pick, pack, and ship. The next cost that you got to consider, which is your transaction fees. So somebody buys online, you got to assume that they're going to use either Stripe or PayPal for most of those transactions. It'll cost you somewhere between 2.5% or 3% or something like that. Then you got to see, well, what was the cost of me selling to that customer online? And you've got this paid media cost, which is your Facebook ads, your Google ads, your Instagram ads. Maybe you're selling on TikTok, whatever it might be. But you've got a cost per unit or a cost per sale that in terms of, okay, if we look at your data for the last month and we said we sold X number of units, our average order value was, and then you can get an average in terms of what your average advertising cost per unit was online. And that gets you down to what your contribution margin is going to be. And that is the profit that you're making in this e-commerce environment. And then the question is, with this €9.35, which is the contribution that you're making online, can you run a business on it? Or how many packets of protein balls do you need to sell in a week, in a month, in a year for this business to make financial sense? So you take this and you roll it out across a 12-month forecast. Okay, so so if we to look at your e-commerce business for the next year, so what are we looking at? So you roll out to 12 you roll out 12 months orders. Okay, take January as a baseline. You'd have an idea in terms of what you're selling already. And what I've done is I've just built a picture of what it would look like for Chewy Bits, my fake protein balls company, to do $1 million a year online. And really what you're looking at here is the above the line is just multiplying my breakdown in my pricing analysis that I've got in the previous slide and multiplying it by the number of orders across the year. What you might notice is that in this business, Chewy Bits has done about 50% of its annual sales in quarter 4. Now, the example probably doesn't hold true that a protein ball business would do that percentage of its annual sales in Q4. But for a lot of people that might be watching this webinar, it would not be unusual for a lot of e-commerce businesses to do 30%, 35% plus online sales in Q4, which is the week prior to Cyber Monday, Black Friday. And it's from there, really, you're on the fun run all the way through until Christmas or whenever this postman won't no longer deliver parcels to people. So right up until a few days before Christmas, you'll be selling hard. And it wouldn't be unusual for you to make a significant percentage of your sales in Q4. Okay, so we've rolled this out across the year and we're asking the question, well, what are the OPEX? What are the operation costs that you would need to include in this business? Well, if you really want to do $1 million online, I would say that there's a very few number of e-commerce entrepreneurs who could push the buttons on Facebook and Google and TikTok and Instagram and so on. That would be as good as using a digital marketing agency. You can give it a go if you want, but you're going to get to a point whereby you're just not going to be able to build those accounts and understand what's working and handle all that yourself without bringing in some expertise. So you're either going to hire in-house and bring a marketing person in-house, or you're going to lean on the resources of an outsourced digital agency. It wouldn't be unusual in terms of, for me to see that maybe $2,000 a month to work with an agency to help support the business that's generating this type of revenue. Just wouldn't be unusual. You might be selling on, a number of different platforms that exist. The most obvious one is going to be Amazon. You make an assumption there around platform fees. You make an assumption around wages and salaries. I just said, well, what would it look like for a business turning over $1 million to spend 15% of its annual revenue as a pure e-commerce business on people? Okay, well, what people might you need besides you rowing the boat? Well, you're going to have to make a wage yourself as a CEO. You might want somebody in operations so that everything isn't coming through you and you can focus on the big vision and driving the business forward. You might want somebody on the marketing side who's feeding the external agency. So, for example, giving them collateral and new content and managing delivery of the program for the year or the planner for the year and so on. Bank fees in your own bank. So who knows who you're at, Bank of Ireland or AIB, whatever that might be. Again, it could cost you 2-3% in terms of bank fees. And you work down along it line by line and let's say you build out the P&L for everything else that might cost you. The software is one that can be needs to be managed in the business. It can be significant. And what I'm saying is that when you build out this picture of a business that's doing $1 million ex-VAT online, is doing 336,000 in a contribution margin, that is a picture of a business that's selling $1 million online and breaking even or just above break even. So you can see that things can be quite tight, and this is I would suggest not uncommon. So a lot of the e-commerce businesses I've been working with for the last couple of years, especially post-COVID, where things have tightened up a little bit, it's not unusual to see declining return on ad spends or MER, marketing efficiency ratio, whereby the money that you're spending on ads and paid media is you're not getting the same bang for your buck, which means that you're looking at sales flattening, possibly declining, and it's very hard. It's hard to look at this operational expenses and decide where to cut. The biggest one here really is, okay, you can save money on insurance, but you're really starting to look at cuts in relation to wages and salaries if you're not at least achieving break even. So my advice would be to any entrepreneur or e-commerce business owner that's on the call or watching the webinar will be, in the first instance, break down your pricing. In the second instance, get yourself a decent forecast for the next 12 months and use that forecast to, as there's usually what you look at will be 3 forecasts, but for the purposes of today's session, let's assume that this will be your baseline forecast. So the 3 would be, a baseline forecast is what you think is going to happen this year, and you manage the business according to these assumptions, which are as close to reality as you can make them. A best case scenario would be, well, if everything goes great this year, what could we achieve? And that's like a best case forecast, which is good for communicating with people on the sales side of business and saying, this is what we're trying to achieve. And the last one would be this worst case scenario, whereby you're saying, well, if things don't, what would be the worst case scenario? And you can manage, you can de-risk parts of your cash flow by kind of getting access to funding and putting an overdraft in place and different things, which you would do ahead of the worst case happening. So you're using the worst case to risk mitigate. But for most business owners, you're going to run the business off this baseline case, which is, here's what I think is going to happen, which is as close to reality based on everything that I know so far. And what you do is you build it out for the year and you adjust quarterly if necessary. You don't adjust monthly. So again, I would suggest that that's something, an exercise that if you don't have this in place already, it's something that you should consider doing. Okay, the next area that I want to touch on is going to be inventory. So a lot of entrepreneurs, kind of, especially if you're an early stage entrepreneur in this e-commerce space, it will have to learn a lot about management of inventory. And so we've got a free Excel kind of calculator. There are software solutions that does this. Inventory Planner, I think, is one that plugs into Shopify. And the idea here is really what you got to do is you got to look at each unit. You got to ask, what was the average number of units that sold over the last week or the last few months? And you got to figure out your run rate. So you take your stock on hand and you multiply it by, how many weeks sales do you have in terms of stock on hand, and you add in a buffer, and a good buffer. So you might look at the stock on hand. You might look at a unit and say, depends, let's say SKU 1, 2, 3, 4. And for you to order a new batch of this product, there's a 10-week lead time. So you send in the order to the manufacturer in Chinese. They got to make the stuff, get it into the manufacturing cycle, put it on a boat. The boat's got to ship all the way over to Ireland. So you've got a 10-week lead time. So that means that you need to, at the minimum, carry 10 weeks stock in the warehouse. And what I'm saying is that carry a buffer, carry 10 weeks plus 4 weeks. So carry 14 weeks worth of stock and have a stock trigger in place, whereby once your stock on hand figure falls below 14 week stock, you put the order in to ship more stock over, and so on, and you manage the business accordingly. And in that fashion, you reduce the possibility of stockouts, you decrease the cost of not being able to ship product by boat and having to pay to basically ship smaller amounts of product by air, which increases your COGS and so on. So you got to get on top of it. You got to break down each stock unit. You got to figure out what the average run rate is for the last 4 weeks. You got to ask yourself, how many weeks sales do you have in stock currently? How many weeks sales do you need to get new product landed and in the warehouse? 10 weeks. Add in a buffer and put in a trigger that is a stock reordering trigger, whereby once the stock falls below 14 weeks stock on hand, you reorder more stock. Okay, so stock is probably one of the hardest pieces to manage in an e-commerce business, and it's the bit that trips most people up because stock is pricey. So for example, you might need to order a new stock, could cost you 20 grand, could cost you 30K to buy a container load. Again, let's assume from China or somewhere like that. And you're trying to do that whilst being out of stock, whilst having no sales. So you've got a lack of liquidity in the business. And what I would say to most first-time entrepreneurs is that's going to kill you. And if you're then into trying to finance stock, you're starting to pay interest rates on bank overdrafts or loans or whatever it might be, and it all gets very expensive and it all starts eating away at your profit margin. So what I would suggest is, as mentioned in the previous forecast, is to get out in front of it, figure out what profitability looks like for you as a business owner, cut costs where necessary, and in addition to the P&L forecast, which I've outlined, get yourself a good cash flow forecast, which includes this stock reordering forecast, i.e. an inventory reordering forecast, and make sure that you've got enough cash today to reorder stock in 2 months' time. And if necessary, put appropriate financing in place to make sure that you always have enough cash to order more stock, because that's the lifeblood of the business. Okay, so next up, I just wanted to touch on briefly on tech stacks. So really from a finance perspective, if you are an e-commerce business, my default is to use Xero for your accountancy function. Now, I know like QuickBooks and Sage Online, both are good products. Particularly QuickBooks is probably competing with Xero. But for me, I think from what I've seen from both products, Xero is the one you want to use if you're an e-commerce business. The reason why is that it just plugs into everything. So one of the things you should do is you should go to the Xero app marketplace and search. And what you get is just, I think there's more than 1,000, I'd say. There probably could be a couple of thousand small business softwares which integrate with Xero. So it means you can build that software eco hub or that software environment to run your business. And figuring out this tech stack can be, I know a lot of business owners have spent too much time playing around with tech stacks and swapping in and swapping out new bits of technology. And really what you want to do is you want to consolidate, figure out a tech stack that works for you and run the business using it and be very slow to change. So my starting position will be is to consider Xero for your accountancy function. As your business grows, you're going to need a stock management system, which is going to be able to give you, especially if you're running multiple warehouses. And the one I would suggest is there's a number of them on the market, but the one that's the best that I've seen is called Deer Inventory. They were recently bought out by Sin7. So if you log on to the website, it might be called Sin7. I think they've kept the Deer Inventory branding last time I logged on. And again, what plugs into what? Well, Shopify will plug into Deer, but if you're not using Deer, Shopify will also plug into Xero, which means your sales get pulled down. Shopify will then plug into Stripe, PayPal. It'll plug into all your banks like AIB, Bank of Ireland, Wise, Revolut, wherever it might be. And then there's whatever tools you're going to use on the marketing side. Klaviyo seems to be popular on the email marketing side. There's a couple of support tools that you can consider. And then on the business management side, probably the fastest growing one I've seen recently is ClickUp and Slack for internal communication. So that's not a bad tech stack if you're an e-commerce business and you're just looking to figure out how do you get this piece of Lego or this building block of the business, the technology bit. That's not a bad tech stack to consider whether it's going to suit you. Now, in each of those boxes, there's a wide range of different options. So pick and choose as you wish. Okay, so with that said, I just want to touch on VAT for the e-commerce business owner. So the way you got to think about VAT as an e-commerce business owner is you got to think about it geographically. So if you're based in Ireland and you're selling direct to consumer, which is you're a business selling to a private individual, then the usual VAT rates are going to apply. It's usually going to be the standard rate. When your sales exceed 75,000 euros or are going to exceed 75,000 euros in the next 12 months, as early as you realize that that's going to happen, you should consider registering for VAT, and you charge 23% to your VAT customers. It would be very important that you log into Shopify or WordPress, whatever it might be, and make sure that the VAT rates are set up correctly so that you're paying the right VAT to the revenue commissioners. Mistakes in relation to making sure that the VAT rates are set up correctly can, like a small mistake on a VAT rate can lead to a very big VAT bill in a couple of years' time once that mistake is uncovered. So you got to make sure that your VAT is set up correctly. Selling to Ireland, assume the standard rate applies. Once you start selling into Europe, if you sell more than 10,000 euros on an annual basis, you can no longer just charge Irish VAT. You need to charge local European VAT. So once you're above 10,000 euros into Europe, you got to charge Italian VAT, French VAT, and so on. And what that means is that you need to remit that VAT to the Italian government or the French government through what's known as the one-stop shop. So again, you got to keep an eye on your European sales. If you're selling more than 10,000 euros, then you got to apply for the one-stop shop and remit the local European taxes correctly. The one that caught everybody out in the post-Brexit world is selling into the UK, whereby I presume that you're an Irish company, you've got some element of UK customers, and they were in Europe, but now they're not in Europe. And what's happening to your customers is that they're meeting the postman on the door, and he's saying, in order for me to release this product to you, you have to pay import tax, which is going to be UK VAT at 20%. One of the ways you can kind of ease the friction on the customer experience in the UK will be for you as an Irish business owner to apply for a UK VAT number with HMRC. One of the easiest things to do, actually. It's actually relatively straightforward to do, but what it means is that you've got a second set of VAT returns that will be due to the UK government, the HMRC, but it means that your customer will log on to your website, they'll buy your product plus 20% UK VAT, and you give the UK VAT to the HMRC quarterly. The rest of the world, if you're selling into America, wherever it might be, again, VAT is an Irish or European tax, so no VAT applies. And that's kind of it in a nutshell. And it can be complicated, especially if you're a new entrepreneur. If you need any help, feel free to reach out. Okay, so moving towards wrapping up. What I would suggest to most people, especially if you're an early stage entrepreneur, is to crawl, then walk, then run. What I mean by that is to make sure that you understand your margins, make sure you understand what scale looks like. If you're launching a new product, break it down based on the pricing breakdown that I've given previously and ask, well, how many of these packets of protein balls do I need to sell to cover the overheads in this business? Am I going to break even? There's no point in investing heavily in marketing, even if the marketing people tell you that it's got a healthy ROAS or MER, marketing efficiency rate, whatever it might be, and they paint you a picture that, listen, you're making money here, just keep investing, whilst at the same time, they're not seeing the full picture, which is the cost of you running that business on a day-to-day from an operation perspective. So it's your job as a business owner to look at all this marketing, all the marketing reports and all the positive green lines that you see on the various reports that marketing agencies are going to spit out. Step back from it and ask yourself the question, okay, this all looks like it's positive and it's going the right direction, and all I need to do is spend more money on marketing. But why have I no money in your bank account? The reason why is that you got to take a bigger view of your business. You got to ask yourself the question, is the contribution that I'm making online covering the operational costs in the business? And have I enough profit that can turn into cash flow to allow me to buy stock without needing to finance it constantly? And that balance is key if you're going to start trying to grow your business quickly in a post-COVID world online. Technology and automation is great. Don't get lost in technology. Just pick a tech stack that works for you and run with it. Ask yourself with each piece of kit that you're considering what the cost benefit is. If it's costing you €800 a month, is it adding that and more in value to the business to a reduction in admin overhead or access, or on the marketing side, it could be adding margins, or it could be targeting people better, whatever it might be. And last but not least, moving towards wrap up, is get yourself a good accountant who understands the e-commerce space that you're operating in. And I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank you all very much for tuning in. We're going to record this video, put it on YouTube. We're going to put links to the e-commerce ebook below. And if anybody ever needs any help, feel free to visit the website and use the contact us page to get in touch. Thank you all very much.